Start with thanking our organizing committee and volunteers. And if they're here, would they want to take a stand, please? Cole Harrison, Rachel Williams, Umang Kumar, Sadia Kiam, Sandra Korn, Joan Eckling, Ann Glick, Duncan McFarland, Derek O'Keefe, and our performers at the reception who donated their time, these wonderful musicians, Alpin Sheth, Sunny Lalchandani, Levi Ali, and Michael Dwan Singh. And I also want to announce who our local co-sponsors of this program tonight are. They include United for Justice with Peace, United National Anti-War Coalition, or UNAC, Boston, Massachusetts Peace Action, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in Boston, Massachusetts Global Action, Help Women Heal, the Harvard Pakistan Caucus, Harvard Pakistan Society, the Muslim Law Students Association at Harvard, and South Asians for Global Justice. I also wanted to comment about who the videographers are here. We have Stan Heller. He's with the program called The Struggle, a cable show in Connecticut, and he is going to put this on cable, and it'll be available for other cable stations. We have Osmond Field. He's going to post this on YouTube. And we have the Cape Cod Times is writing an article. We have people taping for ZBC, Truth and Justice Radio, and for WUMB Radio. And Rodrigo is here, and he's doing a documentary about Malalai and the struggle of the Afghan people. And he's trying to raise some funds to finish up the film. And you can go and get information at Indigo, I-N-D-I-Go-Go, or Indiegogo.com. And then look for Malalai Joya. I'm here also representing, I'd like to tell you about the two main sponsoring organizations that brought Malalai here to this country and are touring her in 10 cities nationally. United National Anti-War Coalition, or UNAC, and the Afghan Women's Mission. UNAC is the largest national anti-war coalition in the United States today, and it was formed in 2010 at a national conference attended by 800 activists from peace, environmental, and social justice groups. We're based on the principles of the need for united action, independence from all political parties, democratic decision-making, out now from all countries where the U.S. wages war, and a commitment to mass action. And since our foundation, we have organized a second national conference and national anti-war demonstrations, including the 15,000-strong protest against NATO in Chicago in May of last year. We have marched, rallied, and spoken out against every war and threat of war coming from Washington. Most recently, we called for national actions to demand hands-off Syria that took place in 80 cities. And we stand for self-determination for all oppressed nations and people. Next July, at SUNY Purchase outside of New York City, we will hold our third national gathering of activists called Imperialism in Operation: Resource Wars, Climate Change, Racism, and the Surveillance State. We encourage organizations to join our coalition. To get more information about the conference and our activities, be sure to sign the mailing list at the registration tables at the back. Or at the front. We will share the list with the Afghan Women's Mission and the local sponsoring organizations. I'd like to tell you about the Afghan Women's Mission. The AWM supports the work of RAWA, the Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan, the oldest political social organization of Afghan women struggling for peace, freedom, democracy, and women's rights in Afghanistan since 1977. Working with refugees in Pakistan and people in Afghanistan, their projects include many programs run by Afghan women, including the Malalai Clinic, schools, orphanages, agricultural programs, self-sufficiency programs, emergency relief, and political demonstrations and functions in support of women's and human rights. I'd like to now introduce Derek O'Keefe. He's a Vancouver-based writer and social justice activist. Is he here? Oh. He's the editor of Rabble.ca, Canada's most widely read progressive website, and has written extensively on foreign policy, Canadian politics, and ecology. He's co-chair of the Canadian Peace Alliance, the largest network of anti-war groups in Canada. He also happens to be the co-writer of Malalai Joya's autobiography, A Woman Among Warlords, on sale here tonight. A book you won't want to be without after you hear her tonight.
Thank you very much, Marilyn, and thank you to UNAC and all the local organizers here. It's an honor for me to come down and just to represent the Canadian Peace Movement. I'm a co-chair of the Canadian Peace Alliance, and just to make some of the connections with the difficult work you're doing and important work that you're doing here in the belly of the beast, as they say, still. With our current Prime Minister, we're kind of right in there with you in the beast, as part of the beast, and we're working hard to change that in Canada. And also, this was just an opportunity for me to, to see a dear friend in Malalai, and when you know Malalai and you know what her struggle is about, you know, every time you part, you worry that you may not see her again. So it's a real thrill to be here tonight and be part of this. It's now almost 10 years, coming up on 10 years in December, since Malalai Joya made headlines around the world by bravely standing up in the Loya Jirga, the constitutional assembly that Afghanistan held after the war. And she essentially played the role of a whistleblower in that assembly. She was the youngest delegate, but also the most courageous. She risked her life to speak out and denounce the presence of warlords and criminals who were dominating that constitutional assembly. So I think you have here tonight not only a heroine for her people in Afghanistan, not only an anti-war figure that has really become an international figure, but also someone who stands alongside the whistleblowers of our age, in my opinion, of Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden and many others, risking everything to tell plain truths that the world needs to hear. So that's who Malalai Joya is. And of course, as Marilyn says, I would more than encourage you to pick up her book tonight. We have less than 50 copies here, so make sure that we sell out. Read her book, share her story with all of your friends and colleagues and coworkers. And it's an honor for both Malalai and I to be here at an event with Noam Chomsky. You know, when you publish a book, one of the first people you send it to or ask your publisher to send it to when you're a progressive is Professor Chomsky. So I remember personally sending ours to, personally sending the book to Noam because the publisher was, it was a sort of corporate publisher, it's Simon & Schuster, right? And the guy who had signed the book was then laid off in the financial crisis. So we were left with a very sort of corporate person, and you know, their priority for a book review was not Noam Chomsky. So all of that to say, we sent it to him personally, and you know, as many of you have probably had this experience when you send a request to him, we were shocked and just sort of awestruck to get back in 4 or 5 days. It seemed like maybe a week or two at most. Not just I received your book and thank you, but you know, a very detailed and thoughtful comments about the book and an offer to help to publicize it in any way that we could make it useful. So yeah, it's a real honor to be here. And my main job is just to plug the book and to bring greetings from Canada, because with the two featured speakers here tonight, it would be ridiculous for anyone to eat into their time. So thank you all for coming, and you know, don't just leave tonight and go off and think you've listened to a very inspiring person who's come all the way from Afghanistan to speak to you. but leave tonight and let that courage and that political fearlessness that she embodies infect you and guide you in everything you do, and go and bug your friends and family tomorrow and tell them who Malalai is, and spread that spirit of resistance. Tomorrow is the 12th anniversary of the war in Afghanistan. It's also the 250th anniversary of the Royal Proclamation by the British Empire. This has big significance for Indigenous people in Canada. And that is the one other thing I wanted to say. Tomorrow is also a global day of action for Indigenous sovereignty and rights called by Idle No More. Have people here heard of Idle No More? All right. So go check out Idle No More, and tomorrow mark the anniversary of the war in Afghanistan by fighting for the rights of Indigenous people everywhere and fighting against empire in all its forms. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek. I'm not going to give a long introduction because everyone here, I'm sure, knows who Professor Noam Chomsky is. We're privileged to have him with us tonight and living in our community. And we are grateful that he writes so cogently and speaks out so willingly to share his knowledge about the injustices of this world and to identify and condemn the perpetrators. I think that should suffice. In a 2005 poll, he was voted the world's top public intellectual in Great Britain. He will speak tonight about the past and future use of, quote, humanitarian intervention.
Can you hear me? The past of humanitarian intervention, the history is not very glorious. The future, that actually depends on us. The concept itself is, the phrase has become fashionable quite recently, but the concept is very old. In fact, just about every act of violence and aggression in history falls under the category of humanitarian intervention, at least if we believe the voices of the perpetrators. And that shows up. There is scholarship, academic scholarship on the topic, and it shows up very clearly there. So, for example, one of the main scholarly books dealing with the humanitarian intervention in modern period by Sean Murphy finds 3 examples of humanitarian intervention in the period before the Second World War. The first was Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia. The second was Hitler's takeover of the Sudetenland. And the third was Japan's conquest of Manchuria and North China. Now, of course, he didn't mean that these were real humanitarian interventions, but he meant that they were the standard kind. They were claimed to be humanitarian interventions. So Mussolini invaded Ethiopia to uplift and Christianize and civilize the backward people of the country. Actually, the same phrases that President McKinley used when he invaded the Philippines earlier in the century, uplift and Christianize them. He uplifted a couple 100,000 of them all the way to heaven, and the Philippines have yet to recover from the humanitarian gesture. Mussolini's invasion was horrendous and atrocious. Hitler took over the Sudetenland in order to, for the noblest of purposes, to end ethnic cleansing, to allow the conglomerate of people there to live in peace under the framework of the superior technology and culture of German civilization. When the Japanese invaded Manchuria and North China, their goal was to create an earthly paradise and to protect the poor people of the region from the Chinese bandits who were trying to undermine this noble project, at least those of them who survived the slaughter, a huge, monstrous slaughter. And that's pretty typical. The early history of humanitarian intervention is quite similar. Actually, one of the earliest modern cases, and one of particular interest to us, happens to be right here. In 1629, the King of England gave a charter for the Bay Area colony of the Bay Area, and the goal of the settlement was to save the natives here from their fate, bitter pagan fate. The goal was, the principal end of this plantation, the king said, was to civilize and Christianize them. And if you look up on the internet, you can find the Great Seal of the Bay Colony of Massachusetts, that's us. It depicts an Indian holding two spears pointed down in a sign of peace, and there's a scroll coming out of his mouth which says, "Come over and help us." So the colonists who came were just responding to this plea from the benighted natives to please come over and help them. Well, a strange thing happened. It was actually discussed later years. Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story, in the two centuries later, in the 1820s, expressed his surprise at what happened. He said that the wisdom of providence, which is inscrutable to mere mortals, caused the natives to disappear like the withered leaves of autumn, even though the colonists had constantly respected them. It's just one of those mysteries. We can't understand the Lord's wisdom and depth. Actually, the perpetrators knew much better. So Revolutionary War hero General Henry Knox, he was the first Secretary of War in the newly liberated colonies. He described what they were doing. What they're doing, he said, is the utter extirpation of all the Indians in the most populous parts of the Union by means more destructive to the Indian natives than the conduct of the conquerors of Mexico and Peru. And he warned that a future historian may mark the causes of this destruction of the human race in sable colors. It hasn't happened. Shortly after Joseph Story's musings on providence, another one of the perpetrators, the architects of the extirpation, John Quincy Adams, lamented the fate of what he called that hapless race of Native Americans, which we are exterminating with such merciless and perfidious cruelty. Among the heinous sins of this nation, for which I believe God will one day bring it to judgment. Earthly judgment awaits, and these are not the staples of taught history, they're only the staples of actual history. On the contrary, what we constantly hear is odes to our unique magnificence called American exceptionalism, also not unique to the United States, but very striking right now. The later history of humanitarian intervention is not very different. After World War II, there are actually a few cases of military intervention that had very benign outcomes. Actually, there are two in the post-World War II period, both in the 1970s. In 1971, India invaded East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, and terminated a monstrous slaughter of millions of people by the Pakistani army. At the end of the decade, 1979, Vietnam invaded Cambodia and put an end to Pol Pot's atrocities, drove out the Khmer Rouge, just at the moment when they were peaking. But these two examples don't enter the canon of humanitarian intervention. because they had a problem. The problem is wrong agency. It's only humanitarian intervention when we do it. We are our clients. And there was another problem with these two cases. The U.S. bitterly opposed them and moved very quickly to punish those who had carried out the crime of ending these slaughters and atrocities. In the case of India, that was Kissinger-Nixon at the time. Kissinger particularly was outraged by this. It was threatening to undermine a secret trip he was planning to Pakistan. He'd already set up all the photo ops and so on. It looked like this might undermine it. We know from recent White House tapes that were released that Kissinger was so furious, he was proposing to Nixon that they use nuclear weapons to stop it. What he said is that if we don't use nuclear weapons, the Russians will attack China and we'll be finished. That's the great diplomat, Henry Kissinger. Nixon was a little more restrained. He thought that mass famine in India would be enough of a punishment for this crime. And Kissinger went on to mock those who, as he put it, who bleed for the slaughtered Bengalis, the millions of them. Who cares about them? Well, fortunately, Nixon prevailed. There was no Armageddon, although the United States did send an aircraft carrier into the Sea of Bengal to warn the Indians of the punishment that they deserve for the crime of one of the two crimes of intervention that actually had major benign consequences. The other was 1979. Vietnam was bitterly condemned for the crime of ending Pol Pot's atrocities. The New York Times denounced them as the Prussians of Asia. The United States imposed harsh sanctions. Sorry, not loud enough. The United States imposed harsh sanctions and, in fact, supported an immediate Chinese invasion to punish the criminals who ended the Pol Pot crimes, and the United States immediately turned to supporting the Khmer Rouge on the borders and their attacks against Cambodia, diplomatic and military support. So those two cases can't qualify as humanitarian intervention. If you look on, there are, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the concept of humanitarian intervention became very popular, and there was a good reason for it. Prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union, every U.S. intervention could be justified as defense against the Russians. Didn't matter how ludicrous the pretense was, you could always claim defense against the Russians, so you didn't need any other pretexts. But with the Russians gone, some new pretext was needed to carry out the same policies, which of course was done. So humanitarian intervention was called upon. The 1990s were a very interesting period of American history and, in fact, general intellectual history. There has never been a period, to my knowledge, of such effusive praise for the magnificence of any state on the part of the most respected intellectuals, respected figures. To give you a couple of examples, from the highest, most respected people, the United States was an idealistic new world bent on ending inhumanity everywhere. Its foreign policy entered a noble phase with a saintly glow. That's Clinton. For the first time in history, a state has arisen that is dedicated to principles and values. That's Václav Havel, acting from altruism alone and moral fervor, hence free to use force where its leaders believe it to be just, supported by the enlightened states who are its respectful allies. That's a small sample of a deluge, again, from the most respected and honored liberal voices, while all through the years the crimes and atrocities mounted. I don't have time to run through them. Well, there was a jewel in the crown, which the final triumph of this noble phase and saintly glow That was the bombing of Serbia in 1999, the Kosovo intervention. There was an enormous chorus of self-congratulation. There was an international commission led by Judge Goldstone Commission of South Africa, which of distinguished lawyers, concluded that the bombing was illegal, but it was legitimate. And that phrase, illegal but legitimate, has haunted us since. Why was it legitimate? Because it was undertaken to stop an ongoing atrocities. There are a couple of problems with that story, which is uniform. It's repeated today constantly. One problem is the chronology. It happens to be the other way around. The bombing was the cause of the atrocities. It was not a consequence of them. We have extensive documentation of this, one of the most richly documented cases in history. 2 huge State Department publications, United Nations reports, monitors on the ground, British parliamentary inquiry, and they all say the same thing. It was an unpleasant place until the bombing, but the bombing set off the atrocities. And in fact, if you look at the indictment of Milosevic for the crimes in Kosovo, you look closely, you'll notice that with a single exception, they all follow the bombing, because that's when the atrocities took place. Furthermore, it was anticipated. The General Wesley Clark, informed Washington a couple of weeks earlier in a discussion about what would happen, that if NATO, meaning the United States, did bomb, of course the Serbs would react with atrocities on the ground. He also informed the press as the bombing began that it was predictable that there would be a sharp increase in atrocities. So these horror stories you've seen are real, but they're the consequence of the intervention. So that's one problem. That one is easily handled just by suppressing the historical record. Almost totally suppressed, richly documented, almost nothing about it. There was another problem, that the traditional victims of intervention vigorously objected. There was a major meeting shortly after of the South Summit, that's basically the non-aligned countries, about 80% of the world's population, and they bitterly condemned what they called the so-called right of humanitarian intervention, referring to Kosovo, which they described as simply old-fashioned imperialism in a new guise. Well, that one could also be handled. It wasn't reported. A few mentions of it were derided, but it did cause a slight problem. One problem was that the notion humanitarian intervention was somewhat tainted in insignificant parts of the world, namely 80% of the world, but it was a little hard to maintain. So the intellectual classes had to ride to the rescue with some new notion. And the new notion is what's called responsibility to protect, R2P. That was concocted right after Serbia to try to deal with this problem. Well, that's, I should say that Kosovo is also regarded as a precedent. The recent debate over bombing, not much of a debate over bombing Syria, did point out that it would be illegal but legitimate because international law has changed. And many commentators, even the President of France, pointed out that international law is a flexible notion. It changes as a result of actions that are taken, actions of state that set precedents. And the United States set a precedent by bombing Kosovo. Actually, this is not quite accurate. So, for example, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, that didn't set a precedent. When the Russians invaded Afghanistan, of course, not a precedent. And what is really meant in this discussion is when the most powerful and violent states carry out an action, those who are in a position to control and shape the way history is presented, that sets a precedent. That's the reality of it. Nevertheless, there was a problem. You needed something new. R2P, responsibility to protect, came along, constantly invoked. It's claimed to be legitimate, because it was supported by the United Nations, which is about half true. There was a recent article you may have seen in the New York Times by Michael Ignatieff lauding humanitarian R2P and saying we have to invoke it. There's a book about him by Derek, which you should look at, recent book on this great humanitarian. Ignatieff, like others, had to ignore a slight problem here too. There are two versions of R2P. One of them, in fact, was adopted by the United Nations, 2005. UN General Assembly adopted a responsibility to protect doctrine. But that one has a condition. It says it has to be within the framework of the United Nations Charter. So you can have intervention to protect people, but only on the condition that it is either authorized by the Security Council or that it's an immediate response to an ongoing armed attack. Otherwise, as illegitimate as before. Fortunately, there's another version of R2P. That's the one that the West appeals to while appealing to the UN for legitimacy. The second one is the concept developed by a commission led by Gareth Evans, Prime Minister of Australia, who's a noted violent interventionist himself. But this one is the operative version of R2P. It's the same as the UN version with one exception. It has a paragraph stating that in the event that the Security Council does not agree on the use of force, regional organizations can carry out military intervention within the area of their jurisdiction, subject to subsequent authorization by the General Assembly, by the United Nations. Well, there's only one regional organization that can do this, namely NATO, and its area of jurisdiction is the world. So what the US, the Western version, the operative version, the Ignatieff version and others, what that says is that NATO can do whatever it likes, independent of international law. Take, say, Libya. Libya is an African state. It's within the African Union. That's the regional organization. They were not silent about the bombing of Libya. They were strongly opposed to it. You didn't read it here, but they were strongly opposed. The African Union gave a series of proposals, sensible proposals, for diplomacy and negotiations to try to achieve the end of the civil strife without leading to a humanitarian crisis, as the bombing in fact did. Well, they were disregarded. They are not the kind of regional organization that is authorized to take a position in the case, under the responsibility to protect doctrine. Libya, as you know, is now a total ruin. You can read about it in the paper this morning. It's such a disaster that they've even had to stop exporting oil almost entirely. Well, the fact is that whatever term is used, the accepted canon of humanitarian intervention, the one accepted here, at Harvard by distinguished intellectuals, by Western powers, that's the one that authorizes aggression and violence by the powerful, whatever name is given to it. That's official history. The real history is an annoyance which is easily ignored if we, of course, allow it to be ignored.
Thank you, Noam. Now we have our featured speaker tonight, Malalai Joya. She's been called the bravest woman in Afghanistan. She was raised in the refugee camps of Iran and Pakistan, and as a young woman, she became a teacher in secret girls' schools, hiding from the Taliban. She also helped establish a free medical clinic and orphanage in her impoverished home province of Farah. As Derek mentioned, at a constitutional assembly in Kabul in 2003, when she was only 24, she stood up and denounced her country's powerful NATO-backed warlords and made headlines around the world. And then 2 years later, she was also kicked out there, and then 2 years later, she became the youngest person elected to Afghanistan's new parliament, and in 2007, she was kicked out there for her persistent criticism of the warlords and drug barons and their cronies. Well, we're thrilled that she's here, and we're not about to kick her out because we support what she does. But as a result of her activism in Afghanistan, she must live underground. She travels with armed bodyguards and sleeps in safe houses. She has survived 7 assassination attempts on her life. And in spite of these threats, this amazing woman, also a new mother of a 10-month-old boy, continues to organize and travel the world to speak out against the injustice suffered by the Afghan people, by foreign occupiers and fundamentalist leaders for decades. As was mentioned, tomorrow is the date of the U.S. attack on Afghanistan 12 years ago, initiating 12 years of occupation, the longest so-called war in U.S. history. Although they talk about withdrawal next year, their intention is to continue the U.S. presence indefinitely. We are thrilled to have Malalai Joya with us tonight to speak the truth about what the U.S. in collaboration with the warlords and the corrupt government has done to her country, particularly the women and children, and what the Afghan people and their supporters here need to do about it. She's going to speak first, and then there's going to be slides shown, and then we'll have a question and answer period. Malalai.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Very nice. Yeah. I was saying hello to everyone. Can you hear me?
Speak close to the mic.
Yes. Hello to everyone. Very nice to meet you all. I would like to thank friends and supporters of the UNAC, United National Anti-War Coalition, and Afghan Women Mission who organized this event and gave me this opportunity to bring the message of suffering and oppressed people of Afghanistan to justice-loving people of the US. And I'm so honored that tonight I'm with dear Professor Noam Chomsky, as I believe who is one of the greatest personalities of the US, as he always raises his voice against injustice and warmongers, and a symbol of our struggle for freedom and democracy. Today, I represent a nation who, after 12 years of the so-called war on terror, still suffers from fascism, of fundamentalism and imperialism of the US and NATO occupation. Besides condemning this disgusting war, I want to share the consequences of these sinister years with you, which were only more bloodshed, crimes, women's rights, human rights violations, looting of our resources, and changing of our country into a mafia state. During these bloody years, the occupation forces and terrorist groups have killed tens of thousands of innocent civilians. Widespread poverty, destitution, and injustice have made life torture for millions of Afghans. It is suffice to say that in the UN Human Development Index, Afghanistan is ranked at 125th position in the top list of most underdeveloped countries. It holds the first position in the corruption index, as around 20 million people out of estimated 27 million population of Afghanistan are living under the poverty line. Under the US and NATO occupation, Afghanistan was changed to the world capital of narcotics, which produces more than 90% of the world opium. I believe opium is even more dangerous than Al-Qaeda in terrorism, as it destroys the life of these innocent Afghans. There is official report that around 2 million Afghans are addicted. Most of them are women and children. Opium brides, usually girls aged below 16, are married off in exchange of opium if a farmer fails to supply opium to a warlord. And it is also the most dangerous place to be a woman, according to the recent report of UNIFEM. Catastrophic situation of women was very good excuse for US and NATO to occupy our country. Although the Western media raised so much outcry about women's rights participation in the political life of Afghanistan, but they are lies. Over 80% of women face some sort of violences, but there is a complete of impunity for the perpetrators of such crimes. Even a woman MP named Nurzia Atmar, who had link with these warlords, she was forced to seek asylum from her abusing husband. Forced marriages, child brides, acid attacks, domestic violences, attack on schoolgirls, etc. are skyrocketing. Recently, 16-year-old Shakila was brutally raped by a member of the provincial council in Bamyan province. And 3 other parliamentarians partners in this crime in trying to forge the medical report of the rape girl. This is just the tip of the iceberg that I shared with you now, but such issues hardly reach the mainstream media because these misogynist criminals kill, kidnap, or threaten to death any journalist who reports such incidents. The US and its allies killed thousands of innocent people under the name of so-called war on terror or fighting against Taliban. But now, US officials and other Western governments, they officially, publicly, shamelessly, they confess that Taliban are not their enemies. And that's true. As at least this 10 years, I was saying on behalf of my people to justice-loving people around the world that Taliban, warlords, all of these drug lords, terrorists are product of the White House, and they are only the enemies of Afghan people, not their foreign master. And now, under the name of National Peace Reconciliation, going to negotiate with Taliban and bring these terrorists of the Stone Age in power too. Even they opened an office for them in Qatar. I believe that peace can never come through the sworn enemies of peace. The way we witness the rule of these Northern Alliance warlords who are brother in creed of the Taliban. Such kind of so-called peace is more dangerous than the current war. Peace without justice and independence is meaningless, and our people first demand for justice. Justice for the blind suicide bombing of the US occupation forces and barbaric jihadis and Taliban who killed their dear ones. Right now, the US and NATO only want a peace for themselves and the expense of putting our people to more disasters through empowering of these terrorists, drug lords, and looters of Afghanistan. And now, US and NATO tell us that they will leave Afghanistan by mid of 2014. It's also another big lie. The people of the world need to know that US and NATO countries are there because of their own strategic, regional, economic, and political interests. As right now, they are working to create at least 9 major military bases in my country to change it into its command base in Asia. Even if they are mobilizing the Afghan army and police, it is just to use them as cannon fodders to decrease the number of their own soldier casualties. And I think itself is enough to show the hypocrisy of the US government. From one hand, they are talking about the withdrawal of their troops, but from another hand, they are talking about US permanent military bases there. Just few thousands of troops they will withdraw to deceive the justice-loving people of the US and around the world. As long as there is US military presence in Afghanistan, we have no independence. In a country which has no independence, talking about democracy, women's rights, human rights, justice is a ridiculous joke. I believe that the only solution for the catastrophic situation of Afghanistan is the withdrawal of all of these troops as soon as possible. Because their presence is making our fight for justice much harder by empowering these reactionary, brutal, and dark-minded forces that are great obstacles for true democratic-minded elements. The show of the so-called election in Afghanistan is another joke with our people. What they portray as democratic election through a corrupt, fabricated, and fraudulent process. Without any doubt, the most disgusting selection ever seen in the human history. Election in an occupied mafia state has no legitimacy at all. I will never be tired to say from every audience to justice-loving people around the world on behalf of my people that no nation can donate liberation to another nation. Liberation should be achieved in a country by the people themselves. And our people can fight the medieval-minded Taliban and their jihadi brothers in creed if they are not supported and armed by foreign masters who shamelessly try to portray themselves as friends of Afghan. And the US government has a long history of replacing democratic regimes with dictators. We have seen in the course of modern history that US government interfered in internal issues of tens of nations to suppress mass movements and block democratic-minded forces from coming to power in the countries where the US has its economic and strategic interests. Iran, Chile, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Laos, Vietnam, Indonesia. These are few of the many countries where US interference brought bloodshed, suffering, and tragedies to their people. I'm afraid the same will happen again to the countries where people stand against dictators. If the leaders of these movements could not stop the dirty hands that are actively working to divert the people's wrath to a wrong and dangerous direction. Egypt is a good and new example. Right now, we are witnessing the disaster going on in Syria, where the Western powers support and arm fundamentalist groups who are brother and creeds of Taliban and Al-Qaeda, to which that country was changed into ashes, and even darker days are expected for its people. The brave protesters in all third world countries must be aware of these facts and learn from history of these other nations. As we see, imperialism and fundamentalism have joined hands to lead the world toward barbarism. We should fight against it even if it happens in Iran, Syria, Libya, Palestine, or Iraq. Fortunately, day by day we are witnessing the glorious uprising of the people against warmongers and economic crisis in different parts of the world, especially in the US, which shows the huge difference of American justice-loving people with their criminal government. I have always said that US has two faces. One is that of a dirty imperialist government, but the other are its great people like my friend Chomsky and many of you who are at least right now here, and countless other justice-loving American people, and great people like Snowden, Chelsea Manning, Matt Schutz, Daniel Ellsberg, John Parker, Mike Prisner, Joe Clinton, and hundreds and thousands of other anti-war soldiers who are considered traitors by their government, but are the real heroes for the determining majority and live in the hearts of all oppressed people around the world. I send salutation to Edward Snowden and Manning, who are so brave to expose the real criminals in Pentagon and White House in the heart of the US, and played a big role in enlightening people around the world about true brutal face of US imperialism. The more such brave people are pressed by the US administration, the more they will find their place in the hearts and minds of suffering people all over the world. They are also my heroes and a source of inspiration. I would like to end my talk tonight with the quote of these two heroes. As Manning says, I don't want to be the part of the killing and crime machine of US government. And Snowden says, I cannot in good conscience allow the US government to destroy privacy, internet freedom, and basic liberties for people around the world with this massive surveillance machine they are secretly building. Heartfelt thanks once again for your solidarity and support.
We're going to see the slides that Malalai brought now. I just want to apologize for the screen. Apparently, the large permanent screen in the church broke. So we have a makeshift one. We want to thank the sexton for providing some screen, and I hope that you can all see. Thank you.
So how I should do this? I should go here? No. Oh, yeah. You are doing here. As a tip of the iceberg, I showed a slide that will help you to know about the realities of the so-called war on terror in Afghanistan and the real nature of these puppets of US warlords and Taliban. This slide you see in the middle is the picture of these warlords who, after 9/11, imposed on Afghan people with suit and tie, and they did civil war from 92 to 96 when they were in power. Around this picture, you can see example of their brutalities during the civil war when they were in power. Yeah. And next one. In this picture also, you see that how the example of brutalities of the warlords, also these troops. That some other picture also I have that how they even make fun with the dead bodies of these Afghan troops and even urinating on the Afghan corpses. Next picture. And this is also example of the brutalities of these, the warlord during civil war, how they destroyed Afghanistan. Now, under the name of reconstruction, they are receiving money from the Western governments, and they are trying to rebuild these kind of places to destroy all the sign of their brutalities and ruin that they did during the Civil War. Next one. This, you see example of some women how they brutally tortured during this 12 years of occupation. This one, you see how Taliban they were beating, and another picture how the women are begging, still wearing burqa in Kabul, while Western governments are talking about women's rights in Afghanistan. This is the picture of Sahar Gul, a young girl, how brutally has been tortured by her cruel husband. Alone the story of Sahar Gul, it takes time now, is enough to know about the role of the US and NATO in Afghanistan and their puppets. Next one. You see here that even still we have jungle law in Afghanistan, that we have this symbolic court, this fundamentalist mafia court, but and especially in faraway provinces, even do not bring these women to these courts. Look how they are beating women with lashes, seem like Taliban time in this picture. And it happened in Ghazni province. And there you see that how 2 women executed publicly, accused them to adultery, shoot it on their head in public. Yeah. Next one. And this picture you see that this is Shakila, 16-year-old girl, as I mentioned briefly in my speech. And now I'm working on this case as this victim family came to me and asking for support to raise their voice. And in the meantime, right now, these warlords who did this violence and crime that raped this girl and then killed her, they are going to, by paying bribe to this fundamentalist corrupt court, to end this case in the favor of these rapists. And now me and through help of my supporter, we are trying at least not only expose their mask, also not let them that easily or try to end it in the favor of these rapists. This big picture is the one who raped this girl. His name is Wahidi Behishti. And this 3 other, you see the picture of these warlords. One is brother of this rapist, and they are enjoying in the parliament, and now they are supporting this case. And as they threatened to death his father, the father of this daughter, they put in jail the brother-in-law of Shakila and accused her that he killed Shakila. And also they are now as they paid money to this father of the Shakila, because they are a very poor family. And now, because the warlord in power, we are trying to find a liar. Nobody, first they are afraid when the supporter mentioned my name, defense committee, that Malalai following this case, they are for security, nobody ready. And secondly, that they are afraid of these warlords, these liars, that to follow this case. And it's very difficult to find liars for such kind of issues that I'm following, hundreds like these kind of cases that coming to me and asking for support and solidarity. Next. This one you see that as a tip of the iceberg, how the girl burned herself, and self-immolation is skyrocketing in Afghanistan. The story of Shakila alone enough to know about what's going on women, just because of lack of time. Briefly, I told you, if you want, you can go to my Facebook to know more about this. And this you see about rape cases in Afghanistan. 4-year-old baby, 5 years old, 7 years old, 12 years old girls. As recently, before I come here, 2 days before, another 4-year-old girl in Herat province, she has been kidnapped, raped, and then the family found a dead body. Next one. Here you see that in this slide, this part of slide, you see the white phosphorus in the bottom, the cluster bomb they use in the middle, and another one, white phosphorus that they used. And another side of picture, you see that the picture of Bibi Aisha in Time magazine, one of the mainstream, most reader magazine. that says what happens if we leave Afghanistan, regarding Aisha's story that who her nose and ear cut off by these cruel warlord. And then they even misuse from the miseries of these Afghan women. As always, I was saying it was better if they changed this topic to what happens to women while they are in Afghanistan. Whenever they give report of these girls to you. Yeah, the next one. And here you see these are picture of the small children and these girls, little girls and boys that how under the name of war on terror fighting against Taliban, they are killing them. Another picture also same. Can you go to another one? They are children, that next one. See here, and this is also civilians, next one. And you see here, in another picture, they are all children. For US government and Western governments, maybe they are terrorists, these 4, 5, or 6 years old babies. And first mainstream media not give report, then even if they give report, they shamelessly decrease the number of civilian deaths and call them insurgents, terrorists. In this picture, you see that how women, they had limited rights in 60s, 70s, and the picture black and white that how they are wearing like Western clothes, modern clothes play their role. These are magazines that they give report on that time. But now you see in Kabul, even in Kabul, the women use burqa for security reasons. And here you see that this 12 years, these so-called women rights that US is talking, and the women who are in power, at least I can give you example of parliament of Afghanistan, 25% seats belongs to women. And most of these women are pro-warlords, pro-occupation, even fundamentalist women there. One of these women, this two, at least as example you can see. This one, she and his brother, they both do drug trafficker. And this one is another woman, her name is Fawzia Kufi. She, and right now, very famous woman in the parliament and with high-level education, very good English talking, going to the Western countries, put dust in the eyes of people, good people like you. And even she wrote a book right now. And anyway, I just wanted to tell you, don't be deceived by such kind of dolls that we have, who are puppet. Yeah. Here, you see that picture, just I wanted to show you because two of my bodyguards last year, they has been injured and as they attacked these terrorists, my office in Farah province. Anyway, Defense Committee put this picture. I didn't want, this is a picture that while I was in Parliament, they beat it me. Anyway, you know about me, I don't want to talk much. Can you go to the next one? Yeah, here you see that example of the violences against women, the different resource, how increased. And you can read it later just because of lack of time. I do not read for you. If you want by email, I can send you. Can you go to next page? Here you see how drug improved. Here, 2001, how much drug almost destroyed in Afghanistan. But as it was one of the main projects of CIA that they changed Afghanistan to the center of the drug and billions of dollars every year from the opium industry they are receiving. Now you see how much opium increased. As I said earlier, 90% of opium in the world produced from Afghanistan even found its way on the streets of New York and Europe. They are saying to the poor farmer, stop planting of opium, but the governor, chief district, commander, even minister is famous drug lords. Yeah. Here also, as I said in my speech, around 2 million are addicted, most of them women and children. Next page. Here, example of poverty that you see that how only this picture says to you everything, that what's going on people there. As in winter, we lose a lot of Afghans' life. And here, this report, if you want, I can send you that rich mine we have. Around $3 trillion resource we have, according recent report, that they are not in the good hands, the occupiers and their puppets looting. And here you see the example of the bribe that, if you want later I send you, that how system is corrupt. Corruption starts from the palace presidential office till the small office. Next page. Here you see that example of the brutalities of the Iran dictator regime that just recently 13 Afghan that was 19 years old, 25 years old, 30 years old, sorry, not 30, 23, the oldest like 30, sorry, 25 years old. This 13 Afghans in the border of Iran, while they are going to work hard there to financially support their family, because they don't have job and they can't have job in Afghanistan, as millions suffer now from joblessness. So they killed them, and the dead bodies when come, these families, victim families, have demonstration. There are thousands in Herat province had demonstration, but never mainstream media gave report of this kind of resistance. Another picture. Yeah, these are some books I show you briefly. Maybe you read also. Devil's Game book help you to know about the role of CIA, not only in Afghanistan, in some other country, and also these fundamentalist warlords in Taliban. Next page. Eyes for Infidel is another wonderful book will help you to know about the reality of Afghanistan and our enemies, Afghan and foreign enemies. Can you go next page? Bleeding Afghanistan is another great book will help you to know especially about this 12 years of occupation. Next, this is my book, you know already. Next. And these are pictures of two heroes, as I mentioned in my speech. I think finished, isn't it? Can you go? Yeah, then you can put my email address and Facebook if you had any question. Feel free. Thank you.
Thank you, Malalai. And I've been asked just to come back to shake you down a little bit. If you're inspired by this, as you've been inspired by this talk and what you've heard, it's my job to encourage you to give as generously as possible here tonight. We know some of you have contributed and attended the reception beforehand as well and contributed at the door, but anything you can afford, much appreciated. Once all the tour costs are covered, and as mentioned, there's a lot of honorariums and sponsorships of the tour, so all proceeds of events of this national tour, which by the way is, I think, about 11 cities over 20 days, all the proceeds will go to Malalai's project via the Afghan Women's Mission. Malalai's various projects in Afghanistan include education, efforts that she started while a teacher during the Taliban years and has continued with various progressive organizations in Afghanistan. Also healthcare projects. And then the victims' assistance that she mentioned. She mentioned the case of Shakila. This was the 16-year-old girl, all the evidence points to was murdered brazenly by a member of the provincial parliament in Bamiyan province. You can imagine how hard it is to hire anyone to work to advocate for Shakila, to find a lawyer, because the lawyer that you're going to get to advocate for Shakila and for the victim's family is going to be threatened with death. So this fundraising that you do will go through Malalai and her associates to victims advocacy to try to stop this epidemic of just absolute impunity for the murder of women and girls, children. These are a few of the things. And now there is an industry of aid to Afghanistan. In the book, Malalai refers to it as the NGO lords of Afghanistan. And there's also hucksters and peddlers and just mildly corrupt people here in the US. Has everyone read 3 Cups of Tea or heard of 3 Cups of Tea? If you've read that book or heard about that book, which really was a phenomenon and a bestseller, I would encourage you to also check out John Krakauer's 3 Cups of Deceit. A very well-known investigative reporter has looked at Gregory Mortensen, the author, and he now 2 years after this expose of 3 Cups of Tea, and some of the ways he massaged the truth in his book, it's reported that he still pays himself $180,000 a year for his charitable work, and that's not counting expenses and travel and staying in hotels and so forth. So all of that to say is that there's a lot of people making a buck off the suffering in Afghanistan. So if you can resist those hucksters and give directly to people who have projects on the ground, directly to solidarity activists and progressive, brave activists like Malalai Joya, a little bit of money that really gets to the people who need it in Afghanistan can go a very, very long way. So all of that, just to have the buckets already gone all the way through. Well, if you're moved to give even more or decide to write a check, you can also do that on the way out. You make your check out to UNAC, the host of this tour, UNAC. Checks are encouraged, and anything in your pockets. This money will go a long way. Just to give one example, a tour we did with Malalai across Canada 3 or 4 years ago, we managed to raise $40,000 in addition to covering all of our costs of the tour. Partly this is because Malalai doesn't stay in fancy hotels, and you can hardly get her to eat on these tours. She just stays with activists and just lives off the generosity of the organizers here. So we raised $40,000. That $40,000 through Malalai went to build a new waiting room and an expansion to the medical clinic in Farah province. And she actually, rather than doing it as just a charitable gesture, she actually went to the tribal leaders in that province, in her home province, and said, what do you need? What are your needs? And they consulted with people, and they decided that they needed to expand the medical clinic. So this is the real aid that we need, and solidarity, not charity, and so that's what your generous contributions will go to tonight. So again, we're going to do a Q&A now, and I think Marilyn's going to come back up. But and the same thing goes for the book. There was a corporate publisher involved in the book, but that money's been done, and Malalai, didn't pay herself anything, essentially. All of Malalai's money for the book goes as well to her projects. So when you buy the book tonight, you'll also be contributing. So I'll leave it there, and we're going to do a Q&A now. I'm sure you have lots of questions and comments for Malalai and maybe Noam as well. I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Professor Chomsky, would you come back up? Rachel, do you have the cards? Where's Rachel?
I'm just going to write the questions.
Okay, people might want to write their questions.
No, I'm going to write them down.
You don't want to circulate the cards? Okay. All right, so be it. Who has questions or comments for either Professor Chomsky or for Malalai Joya? I guess I need you to line up by the mic in the middle there. You can't get out? Oh, boy. Okay, why don't you go ahead, Sunny. Nice and loud.
So my question would be for Malalai. I wonder if you can share with us how some of the progressive organizing is going on in Afghanistan.
We have some democratic-minded progressive organization there. Some democrat and secular organization, men and women. For example, Solidarity Party of Afghanistan now is a secular democrat party that they are organizing demonstrations. They are protests against occupiers and against interfere of the and brutalities of the neighbor countries like Iran, Pakistan, etc. And against this rule of Taliban and warlords. As hundreds and thousands of people joined their demonstration, but never mainstream media gave report of this. And how to organize this, of course, not easy there in Afghanistan. First of all, it is very risky. And especially this party is running by youths. And as they are active there, as example of how they are organizing, facing so many challenges, obstacles, risks, and you should support them. RAW organization is another women organization, as our friend mentioned earlier, and you may know about them because they also have international trips and they are active there, I see how much they are underground in Afghanistan because of security mainly. But they have projects, especially I'm a fan of their education project that they have, but they are very underground and working for women. Alone their website is enough to open your eyes and help you to know about the truth. And also there are some other organizations working for justice, like Social Justice Seeker called SOJ, and they are very brave as they are working on the case of the victims, and they are also risking their life, and they are like an organization. How to say this in English regarding that you said how they organize their work. They have contact with the victim families, as recently 5,000 victims that the list, you may hear about this. The Attorney General of Holland exposed this list, released this list, that this 5,000 intellectuals has been killed by puppet of Russia during the occupation of Russia. Now this list has been released, and when the victim families, after more than 3 decades, after 30, 35 years, they know that what happened to their father or their brother, as they before didn't know, just they disappear, and these killers did massacre in Polycherchy jail. And this organization have contact with these victim families with the picture. They had demonstration. This 3 days was mourning days in Afghanistan before I came here. And many examples like this, that how they work there, it is mainly, unfortunately, underground, but also publicly they have projects they have, and they are receiving retreats, and this is how they are working. But they can't have like TV, they can't have like radio. Financial problem is one main problem, security problem is another key problem. But the positive point and hopeful point is that they are active. They are not afraid, and their number is growing and growing and growing. As example, I can tell you about the Solidarity Party. Their demonstration few years ago, less people attend, but now more and more people join their demonstration when they organize.
Okay, yes.
Can't hear you. Probably not on.
I'm Zareen, and I have 2 questions for you, if I may ask. In a country that has been so oppressed, I would like to understand what gave you the courage and the motivation, and was it your upbringing? Was it something inside you? What helped you be who you are and be able to speak up? And my second question was, what do you see as the outcome of all your efforts that will be realistic outcomes? Are you alleviating suffering as best you can as you see it? Or do you have a plan for transformation? And do you see that in your lifetime?
The first part of your question, I think that the disaster is going on there is enough that do not let our consciousness that to be silent or sit silent. As right now in front of my people is 2 ways: sit silent or do a struggle. As we have proudful history, we never accept occupation, and now it become like open secret for these Afghan that our country has been occupied, and these terrorist puppets imposed on Afghan. So the support of my people encourage me. This international solidarity, it gives hope, courage, determination that not sit silent and looking at how I'm walking in the day by day, proof for me that walking to the right direction.
as always, I'm saying to my supporter that what I said, I wish that came wrong, that then I said apologize to my people and supporter around the world. But unfortunately, what I have been saying coming true at least this 10 years. And also the history, powerful history that we have is enough that to learn from, and especially from the hero and heroine of Afghanistan, that we have to follow their path, who martyred, men and women. Anyway, different reasons that do not let me to sit silence. And as Martin says, there come a time in the history that silence is like betrayal. And also, you said about how it is realistic. You mean that if I do not misunderstand, since I am alive, to see in my life what I'm saying come true, yeah?
And do you have a plan? Do you think it will transform?
Yeah, plan for this. You know, we work for justice together, like network. I'm not alone there. We are working like in the name of Defense Committee, that we have this network. We are like group working, but like a party, but don't have name. Also, other Democrat Party support us, that together as the first demand of people, as I said, is justice. Collecting document of their crimes for the future, that not nationally, internationally, bring them to the court. First, we should raise political awareness of these most of non-educated sufferer people of Afghanistan. This is the main goal, the main project and plan that we have, and also to make them organized for these goals that we have. Is educationally trying. The education is another plan that I have, but the most important, I believe the key, when these people become educated, especially at least this half of population, they never kill themselves when someone rape them or commit crimes against them. These men never go, as some Afghan go with Taliban to take their revenge from the warlords. To go with one terrorist to fight against another terrorist make no sense. So they have contact with us, as there I am working underground with these people, groups and groups of people underground I meet, and then we do the political discussion and working for this cause. Justice, execution of these warlords, Taliban, these puppets, these killers, and against the occupation, doing organized and open their eyes and working for education. And this list can be prolonged. This is our plan for the future. Yeah. Thank you.
Can you get in line? Thanks.
Hi, Tim Carrigan with Veterans for Peace. I had mentioned this to Malalai before this event started. I'm sorry if it already exists. If it does exist, please publicize a central website where we can cut out the middlemen and support different groups and individuals directly. As Malalai's co-author had just mentioned, a lot of the money may be going to people who shouldn't be getting it. And I'd like to think that some of the internet technology may allow some anonymity, so that even if people were working underground, maybe they could still get funds. Like one of your assistants said that you can't necessarily publicize someone's name if they're working underground. So maybe there's some way to leverage internet technology to get funds to those folks. Thanks.
Website. MalalaJoya.com.
Does that have all the different individuals and groups and all their info and the?
No, it just has some groups.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
another one is Afghan Women's Mission, the co-sponsor of this tour. It's a conduit for funds to Afghan projects. Go ahead.
Yeah, and also these democratic-minded organizations, these social networks, or some Democrat NGOs, I mean that honest NGOs and activists. If you want to know about their activism and follow, then there is my email. If you send an email, ask this question, all their website and their Facebook, all this information I sent you, like this Solidarity Party, like RAWA organization, like Social Justice Seekers, like OPAC, HACA, AFSICO. There is a number, but more than parties, we have intellectuals in Afghanistan. Their contact is also good to give you, to have link with them, to work together. And this defense committee itself is also like a group. You should encourage them. Most of them volunteer. All of them, I can say they are volunteer and they are working there and active. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yes.
Here's a question for Malalai. You said that you see the Taliban and the warlords as a product of the White House. So my question is, in Afghanistan, is there a perception that Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden might also have been a CIA fiction from the beginning? Because that opinion is shared by a sizable percentage of the American population. And there's a movement in the country, they call it 9/11 Truth. So I'm curious what your perception of 9/11 Truth is and what the perception of the people of Afghanistan is. Is that a correct way that might be true, or do you think those ideas are wrong-headed?
Yeah, the first part, only the last part of your question I didn't catch, but the first part you said about Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. You know, all these terrorists are same. They have links in a way with each other. And these extremist fundamentalists and these terrorists, who, especially religious, is a good tool in the hands of them to use it against the people, and they are product of the White House, especially in other Western big powers. And Al-Qaeda, now you see how hypocrite U.S., at least now you see that how in Libya they supported these terrorists, this Al-Qaeda, and against dictator like regime like Gaddafi, removed and brought in power these fundamentalists. And Syria now you are looking how they are giving weapons and arms and support these fundamentalists there. It shows the hypocrisy of the U.S. regime that one day they are their friend, another day they are their enemies. And just when you see their background, all that they created mainly by U.S. as a superpower. And Osama bin Laden himself, that how you saw that it was especially for them a good reason that to occupy Afghanistan or this 9/11 that happened, and then they played this game of Tom and Jerry with Osama and these Taliban as they did, and then finally Osama eliminated by Obama's administration to pretending like a hero. And anyway, as you see that how no difference between the Obama's administration and Bush, even Obama is, I believe, for this wrong policy that he have in waging the war as a second and even dangerous Bush. But for U.S. it's very easy to create another Osama for the execution, for the justification of their criminal war. Let's say like this. Anyway, and the godfather of all these terrorists is the U.S. And one day, if it was good for them, for their dirty agendas they have, they say they are their enemies. Another day, they are their friends, just like a family fighting among them, fighting between husband and wife.
Okay, how about a question for Professor Chomsky, too? Go ahead.
My question is a simple one. Have they succeeded in closing the girls' underground schools? The girls' underground schools. Have they succeeded in closing them? How is the situation of the girls towards education right now?
Yeah, you know, education, how much important the government says that Western media says, Western government, that 6 million girls go to school. And it's a good reason for justification of their occupation. But now there is many reports, even from the ministry office of this puppet regime. Hundreds doors of schools now has been closed for lack of security. Even Taliban in faraway provinces burn the schools and destroy, and even the girls when go to school, these warlords in Taliban both, they threw acids or kidnap or rape. Anyway, education, how much important, it's not in their program that really empower people educationally, especially women. Just they have some project, especially in big cities, for justification of their occupation. Like in Kabul, Herat, Mazar Sharif, you see some women and girls have access to education. But in other provinces, the level of education is very low, even. And even in Kabul, in the University of Kabul, those who graduate, even some of them, I see that they cannot write well. and their education, the level is very low. Anyway, and many times the teachers and students, they have strikes, demonstration. For months they are not receiving their salaries. Even they have some books that they are doing like brainwash these girls and these boys. Like one gun is equal to one gun plus 2 gun is equal to how many gun? Or one infidel has been killed by one by one foreigner, and something like this. You know, they are indirectly doing brainwash. The books released by Nebraska. Anyway, many examples like this. All right, thank you. But we have some project, education project from this Democrat organization, I told you, some honest NGOs. You can support them.
Hi, I would like to ask Professor Chomsky, what is the most significant humanitarian intervention of the United States during history? What is the most significant humanitarian intervention of the United States? And I would like to say just 2 phrases, I'm taking the chance, that there are also other kinds of intervention and other kinds of intervention and manners that can rule, ruin, and destroy a country and its people, such as economic war and economic occupation, which is happening the last 3 years in my country, Greece. Thank you.
Well, I can't really think of the most significant humanitarian intervention because I can't think of any humanitarian intervention. And it's not just the United States. Try to find one in history. It's not easy. Maybe you can somewhere dig one up. Maybe somewhere you can dig one up, but can you think of one? A genuine humanitarian intervention? I mean, there are interventions that have had a very benign effect. I mentioned 2, the 2 main ones in the post-Second World War period, India and Vietnam. But those don't count. First of all, we didn't do them, and we opposed them. And again, and if you really look at them, they weren't undertaken with the aim of ending atrocities. They were undertaken for other aims, and they did end massive atrocities. But to find a genuine humanitarian intervention, one taken by a state with the goal of ending atrocities selflessly, see if you can dig one up. Scholarly literature can't.
Hi, I'm Alicia Sander-Zachary. I'm a student at Tufts University. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on the role of Afghan youth in the progressive movement and how the movement's reaching out to youth to encourage them to be a part of it.
Yeah, youth, you know that they are the victim of these more than 3 decades of the war. So more than everyone, they are against the war and they are active there, fortunately. At least this Democratic Party, I told you, Solidarity Party of Afghanistan and these social justice seekers, this running by youths there. And their leaders are youth and their members, most of them are youth, and they are so brave there and active. And there also we see students of the university when I have meeting underground with them that how they politically discuss, and always with this question they come, what we can do, how we can bring positive changes, especially this glorious uprising happened that in these countries, Arab countries, even they are following the protests in US and these countries. They are so emotional and happy about this, giving them hope, and also they agree with this and following this. And same in their country, they do campaign for this cause. But unfortunately, as I said, those who are in power, it's very risky for them. Most of them have to be underground, but they are active there. And you see at least some of these demonstrations that how they are active, and they are eager to education is very a point of hope, very most important point of hope, that how they have eager not only to education. Internet is we live in the century of 21st, that unfortunately they don't have this golden chance that to do campaign for democracy, freedom against occupation. Right now, 2% Afghan, they have access to internet. There is official report. But there we see that how those who have access, they do campaign through these social networks. And if you want, I can give their contact, and you should stay in contact with them, encourage them more. And the next part of your question? This one.
Oh, I was just wondering how, despite all these great risks, how youths are encouraged to be a part of the movement.
How to? What kind of movement? You mean that movement in Afghanistan or outside?
In Afghanistan, yeah.
How they collaborate? Yeah.
You answered it. Thank you.
Yeah, I already answered. That's why I'm confusing. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Stan Heller, TSVN. I have a question about the 80s. There are some groups in the United States who claim that when the Soviets were in there, it was a golden age of rights for women. I know Rawa disagrees, and I would like both speakers perhaps to talk about that period.
Actually, there is some, it certainly wasn't a golden age for, it was not a golden age for rights for anyone. It was a horror story. But the fact of the matter is that towards the end of the Soviet invasion in Kabul, it was a period in which women had significant rights. Actually, there's several publications about this, by a woman named Rasil Basu. She's a well-known international feminist figure. She's one of the people who founded the International Rights of Women Day in 1974. And she was the UN ambassador to Afghanistan with special concern for the rights of women in the last years of the late 1980s. And she wrote several articles which were quite interesting. She's a very sensible person. She certainly didn't claim it was a paradise, anything like that. But, well, you can talk about it better than I can. But she described a pretty high degree of freedom for a segment of educated, relatively privileged women at the universities who did face dangers. But the dangers they faced were people like Gulbuddin Matyar, the U.S. favorite, throwing acid in the faces of women who were not, they said, weren't dressed properly. She has several interesting articles about it. You can find them with some effort. She submitted the articles to the U.S. press. They refused to publish them, the mainstream media. She submitted the articles to Ms. Magazine, the feminist magazine. They refused to publish it because you're not supposed to say that. So she ended up publishing them in, I think it was in Asia Times, an India-based journal. But you can find them. So that did exist, but it certainly wasn't a golden age for women or anyone else. It was a horror story.
I think I already answered your question. During my speech and also the slide also was enough that I think maybe you were not on that time. Anyway, but you want me to give more example of this?
Well, I know that Rawa was against the Soviet occupation, even though there may have been some positive aspects for women.
Oh, you are asking about Soviet time regarding, oh, sorry, I misunderstood the question. Anyway, but you know, Soviet, when the role of the Soviet, when you compare with the role of the fundamentalists when they were in power in Taliban and even this 12 years of occupation, this two, when you compare, we have that, how to explain this in English to you, that time was better than this time when you compare, like between bad and worse. That is bad and this is worse, you know? Like this. I hope you understand what I say. But They committed crimes under the name of socialism. They did. They have nice banner like good food for people, good house, blah, blah. But like now, US, they have good banner like women rights, human rights like this. But regarding the woman, especially the woman situation you asked was, you even cannot compare with this extremist fundamentalist warlords in Taliban. But they have many things in common. Like they also puppet, Taliban and warlords also puppet. They were, on that time, they committed crimes under the name of secularism, and now they are talking about Islam, this puppet of Russia. The difference was that, like these warlords in Taliban did massacre without making list of the people. They did massacre in Polycherchy jail with the list, as one list of their crimes, I said, now released. Regarding the women, for example, on that time, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar party, these extremist fundamentalists, they threw the seats, as Professor Noam Chomsky also said about this. There was happening some examples that as a beginning, but the policy that they had was wrong. For example, most people are, one example I'm giving you, that most people are Muslim. This is Muslim country, but they were pretending like to two couple when they marry, if to bring mullah, it is religious. No need to bring mullah, no need to be nikah, something like this. And they were organizing such kind of marriage party. And it was too much for the people, for this Muslim people. It's like to impose on someone to wear a scarf or not wear a scarf, you know, like they were doing like not wear a scarf. Many examples like this, but no question that they were progressive, they were intellectual. When you compare with the Taliban and warlord, the puppet of Russia, they call themselves, we are communists, we are socialists, but they killed countless, hundreds and hundreds of those who were socialists, those who were communists. Same like their ideology, but they were not puppet. And they just eliminated them. And regarding the women also, that those women who were activist women, those who were against the role of them, it was easy for them to eliminate or have to leave or to be silent. Otherwise, they killed them. Yeah.
Yes. Hi.
Sorry, just one sentence I want to add. And now also that they are part of this regime, especially they are running the intelligence service in Afghanistan. As they are intellectuals, I can't say intellectual, how I should say so-called intellectual. I mean that educated one, and they running this intelligence service, and because these warlords and Taliban are so stupid and not educated. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure listening to you all speak. My question is related to, you referenced the U.S. troops, the source of the problem being U.S. troops still in Afghanistan. And my question relates to, I guess, U.S. troops left Iraq officially about 2 years ago. My question is, why did the U.S. decide to withdraw from Iraq, for instance, earlier? And there's still, the U.S. has not withdrawn from Afghanistan completely. And what's the motivation for keeping troops there? And do you believe President Obama when he says he really wants to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan? And what's preventing that from happening?
I will answer this, then Professor Chomsky also can answer this question. You know, in Iraq, it is true that apparently they left Iraq, but their puppet regime remained there. And what they did in Iraq alone is unforgivable and unforgettable, U.S. And same like what they did in Iraq, they occupied Iraq because of oil of Iraq, and now indirectly they interfered there, and they have their own puppet regime there. And still continue their barbarism in different way. Same now in Afghanistan, as now it become like open secret for them, this endless, disgusting war. They are making more powerful their puppet regime by bringing Taliban also in power, make more unite these killers, and also expanding their military bases there, going to legalize their military bases, and they have countless secret military bases to continue to their barbarism again. And then a few thousands of the troops leave, but they remain their bases and their puppet regime. Then same like what they did in Iraq, they control. And as Professor Chomsky said regarding the Iraq, alone embassy of Iraq, if I'm not wrong, that you said like city within a city, a huge city within a city. I read. Yeah, according embassy of U.S. It is exactly same like in Afghanistan. And many things we have in common. But in Afghanistan, why they choose in Afghanistan? Because of the geopolitical location of Afghanistan. We are in the heart of Asia. There's many reasons they don't want and they will never leave voluntarily Afghanistan. First, through Afghanistan control these Asian powers, China, Russia, etc., and have easily access to the gas and oil of the Central Asian republics, especially they are working on the project of the pipeline, going to finish it by support of their puppets. And also they are receiving billions of dollars from opium industry, as after oil and gun, trade of oil and gun, they are making a lot of money from this dirty business of opium. And also they are looting our rich resource that there we have, as our copper mine is the second best copper mine in the world. And we have uranium, lithium, blah, blah. And many examples like this that these are the reasons, main reasons that they never leave Afghanistan voluntarily. Yeah. And Professor Chomsky, do you?
To add a word about Iraq. The United States had no intention of leaving Iraq. They were forced to. Iraq was a total defeat, extreme defeat for the United States. If you want to check it, take a look at there was an official declaration of the Bush administration in November 2007, it's right toward the end, in which the administration stated its long-term goals for Iraq. There were two conditions. One was that the U.S. have military bases in Iraq, which it can continue to use for combat operations, and of course for its position in the Middle East. The second was that U.S. corporations must be privileged in their access to Iraqi resources, meaning oil. That was November 2007. In January 2008, that was reinforced by one of these famous signing statements. You know, when the president has to sign a legislation, but he adds, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to live up to it. It's called a signing statement. In January 2008, there was such legislation, appropriations legislation, and Bush and whoever writes his comments for him added that a signing statement saying that they would not sign anything that restricted these two objectives. That was January 2008. They couldn't get away with it. The Iraqis refused. Iraqi nationalism was strong enough to prevent the U.S. from carrying forward these intentions. So Bush had to start the withdrawal process. Obama's just continued Bush's program.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was very, it was great. I have two questions, one from Malalai, one from Professor Chomsky. Malalai, there are countries that never recover, and the destruction, the chaos, even the infrastructure becomes so damaged that the country never comes back. And I will give an example of Haiti today. Given the circumstances and the current situation of your country, do you think that there is still a hope of the country recovering once the United States leaves and the country becomes again its own, which is handling his own business, that the tools are still there and the structure is still there to the country come back? And I'm going to ask Professor Chomsky now. Puerto Rico has been part of the United States since the Spanish-American War. My country, Dominican Republic, has been invaded twice by the United States. And even last year, the United States said that there is an island out of the coast of the South that they want to put a military base for the sake of protecting the country against drug trafficking. That's actually a natural oasis for many birds that fly from Florida to the corner of the island. Now, my question for you is the following. For a country that can not even agree on a budget, for a country that is clearly divided in opinion, whether it's the general media, whether it's the left media, right media, doesn't matter, I see that the war machinery is still intact. They cannot agree on general regular things, but when it comes to war, invasions, putting military bases, how and why this happens?
What country?
Dominican Republic.
So why are there bases established?
Yeah, and why is the military war strategy intact?
Why does the U.S. military want the bases?
No. How does this keep happening, even in a country that is in so much disarray economically right now, and they're still expanding everywhere? And who controls that? Where it comes from? For a country in Congress, they cannot even agree on a budget.
That's what it means to run the world. If you're the mafia guy, you put in the bases where you want.
Sorry.
It's simply power and violence. Dominican Republic's a perfectly good example. Of course, Woodrow Wilson invaded the Dominican Republic, half destroyed it. It did even a more monstrous attack on the other half of Hispaniola, Haiti. The Dominican Republic supported dictatorships, Trujillo, a whole series of dictatorships. In 1965, it looked as if there was going to be an independence movement in the Dominican Republic. Johnson sent the troops and put that one down. And so it continued. It's simply violence. Do you know any other country in the world that has 800 military bases around the world? Nobody else has the power to do it. I mean, France has about 2, I think. Britain doesn't have any anymore. The United States has maybe 800, maybe 1,000. That's what power is. And the countries that don't want it are treated like the Dominican Republic. They're invaded. Or the government's overthrown. Well, right now, first of all, the government generally functions reasonably well. Right now, there is a serious problem. The government is not functioning. But that's something pretty special in the last roughly 10 years. What's happened in the United States, and this has not affected the military. They, if you notice, are still getting funded and so on. What's happened, generally speaking, in the United States, last generation, is that there have been significant economic changes. So the economy's moved towards financialization, destruction of the productive part of the economy. It's still there, but it's offshore, Bangladesh, China, and so on. So there's exportation of production, financialization of the economy. It's led to very sharp concentration of wealth, as you know, and stagnation for most of the population. This is the concentration of wealth leads to concentration of political power automatically, which keeps the vicious cycle going because of new legislation, deregulation, and so on. All of this has led to a situation, and meanwhile, the cost of elections has skyrocketed, not just presidential, congressional, everything. The net effect is that power is very heavily concentrated in a tiny group, which is pretty far to the right. If you go back 30 or 40 years, there was a kind of a standard quip, which was sort of accurate, that the United States is a one-party state, the business party, with 2 factions. And now it's a one-party state with 1 faction, and it's not Democrats, it's moderate Republicans who call themselves Democrats. The Democratic Party's shifted so far to the right that it's kind of like what moderate Republicans were a generation ago. The Republican Party's gone off the spectrum. There's nothing like it in any parliamentary system. They have so dedicated themselves to the ultra-rich and the corporate sector that they can't get votes. And in order to get votes, they've had to mobilize sectors of the population which have been around, but were never a political force before. So the religious right, for example, it's a huge sector in the United States. Nativists who want to keep everybody out because they're taking everyone's thing away from us. It's a very frightened country. It always has been. So people who are afraid they've got to have guns to defend themselves from the UN or the federal government or whatever. These sectors of the population have been mobilized. The Republican establishment is trying to control them, and it can't. That's what's happening in Washington now. This is not just, this opinion is expressed by the most respected conservative figures. I mean, the most respected conservative political analyst in the country is Norman Ornstein, American Enterprise Institute, a very right-wing institute. He simply describes the new Republican Party as what he calls a radical insurgency, which has no interest in parliamentary politics, won't accept science, won't accept anything. They just have their own fanatic beliefs. If somebody says there's global warming, you get somebody on Fox News saying we'll leave it in the hands of the deity. Now, that's what's going on. So yes, under those conditions, the government is dysfunctional. But it's not what has happened it's not what's happened in the past, and it's not, plenty of things wrong, but not that. And it hasn't affected, maybe it will affect the military, but it hasn't so far. And it certainly hasn't throughout this whole period when the military system expanded all over the world. And in fact, right now, the U.S. is expanding its military base system quite extensively. So, for example, Africa is being saturated with what will become, already partially are, but will become military bases. So it continues. But the dysfunction is real, and it's due to a sharp drift to the right in the whole mainstream society, the establishment, the economy, the social system, the political system, and so on. I mean, somebody like, say, Richard Nixon today would be way out on the left. In fact, Congress today is trying to dismantle Nixon's relatively progressive accomplishments. That's what's happened to the country. It's an international scandal.
According to your question, as always I say, if US and NATO, these foreigners, let us to breathe a little bit in peace. If they leave us alone, then I'm sure my people, even with empty hands, they will build their countries. But unfortunately, the interfere of these foreigners, they still, not only that they are there for their own interest and they have these different kind of dirty agendas as this one dirty British policy nowadays, they are playing dividing role there in Afghanistan. Even we are very worried about division of Afghanistan. We are talking about reconstruction of Afghanistan. While a U.S. senator says once that the only solution of Afghanistan is the federalism. Federalism, division. And also our British politician says publicly that the Afghanistan solution is division. And anyway, and nowadays there are a group of warlords going to Germany. There are these wrong politicians organized for them big, expensive conferences, and they say the solution is federalism. And as publicly they are talking, we are really worried about this division of our country. But while you say reconstruction, it is so easy. No question that we need a helping hand. While we want the withdrawal of the troops, international solidarity of justice-loving people around the world, morally and financially, especially educationally, they should support our people. And this project that we have for education, reconstruction of Afghanistan, women's rights, etc. Anyway, but you mentioned the example of Haiti. Let me give you the example of Sierra Leone. Look, in Sierra Leone, they are the most diamond of the world is there. If I pronounce correct, Sierra Leone. You know Sierra Leone? Sierra Leone. This African country, Sierra Leone, where is the most diamond of the world is there.
Sierra Leone.
Yeah, Sierra Leone. Yeah. But the most poor people is living there. Afghanistan is the second one, like the second trillion. And Haiti and many other countries, when you see in a way in the behind of this, all these miseries and all these wars going on there for endless time, is the hand of these foreigners for their own interests. And just I wanted, regarding the question before, our one of our supporters asked that according Russia puppet, I want to tell you that in point of view of my people, this puppet of Russia is, they have the responsibility of the beginning of this disgusting war in Afghanistan. As during the Cold War, they created this kind of situation, opportunity for the US to create these fundamentalist extremists that give them weapons, empower them, and then they come and power the civil war. I mean that their responsibility is more, they are more criminal. The people want us now and always the public prosecution of them. And they say they have the responsibility of the starting of this disgusting war in Afghanistan. And secondly, 2 times they committed crimes. Once in the past, as I said, in the name of socialism, when they were in power, committed crimes. And now, with nice banner of the US, joined the hands with extremist fundamentalists together continue to their fascism. So they are, I don't know how to, and did you got what I mean? Yeah. Anyway, I'm wondering about my English. That's why as I wish I can't explain sometime.
Okay, we're going to take the 2 people standing in line, and that'll be it. Andre?
Hello, Malalai and Professor Chomsky. Thank you for being here. I think that the obstacles that we're confronting are huge. I call it a behemoth, the corporate and military and economic hand. And there is, though, something to be happy about, that now people can unite. And I think the violence in the past year around the world has given us an opportunity to unite around nonviolence. So I wanted to ask you what you think, if there was a group that was promoting nonviolence, and there is a group, it's the Nobel Women, they're now advocating the highest ideals of nonviolence and economic change. So what if there was a group that could unite the people around nonviolence? What would you think?
I think it would be great. Let's go do it.
But let me tell you something, just I want to, no question that everyone wants non-violence struggle as human being. But sometimes in a history come a time, unfortunately, let me give you a simple example, like my life now as example in front of you. Maybe I can say that like you and like others, even sometimes I can say more than every one of us says that I'm more than everyone against the war, against the gun and gun laws. You see, I stand up against gun, and now gun is part of my life. Maybe since I'm alive, gun will be with me, just to protect me. So I do this struggle, non-violence struggle, but I have to have gun. In my country, British occupied, interfered, Russia occupied. People have to take gun to fight against them. But in fact, it was non-violence struggle too. But sometimes have to take gun. Sometimes in a history come a time that this non-violence worship, philosophy, wonderful philosophy of Gandhi not working. Sometimes you have to take, that not suits the situation of your country. For example, right now, when I see the people, even they are calling me, they contact me, Malalai, do you need gun? We have gun. When especially they attacked my office last year, or since Loijerga, many times I hear this question. Or they say, if you request that to take gun, go to the mountain again, start fighting against them. Because you see how many similarity with the Russia time, with the British time. And now, as I said, it became clear for them they occupied Afghanistan. And many examples like this, that if US and NATO not go out voluntarily, if the people take the gun to fight against them, it never means that this is not non-violence struggle. To save the secure of their country, to save the life of their people against the warmongers, against the occupier, against their puppets. Sometimes you have to take gun to do struggle against them. There will be no other choice in front of you. Anyway, we wish that they voluntarily leave. No need to take the gun, as people fed up and tired of these different kind of the wars. As example, I'm telling you in my country, but they don't leave us, and they do not leave Afghanistan.
Yes, and when the women around the world unite and promote nonviolence in their own country to influence their own government, and when they do it all at the same time, then there'll be political, social, and economic change, is my theory.
Yeah, we do that. Now we are doing there, and you as.
Yes, I know you do, and I commend you, and I follow and I read about some of all the women organizations that are promoting nonviolence, and I commend you.
I just wanted to say that after the last question, Malalai will stay around for a little while, and we'll be selling her book over there, and also she'll be signing them if you'd like to hang around afterwards.
Well, I feel honored to have attended this extraordinary meeting for both Professor Chomsky and Malalai. You are an extraordinary young woman, and we have a lot of faith on you. My question to Professor Chomsky is, given your description of this country, how long do you think the majority of Americans is going to take it? How are they going to cope with all these injustices that are happening in the country? And to Malalai, do you feel that your life is in danger when you go back to Afghanistan? What are you going to do to protect yourself? And then, are you running for office? Or do you think that there is another means to transform your country?
There's no answer to that question. Depends how much we can achieve. I mean, take things that have been achieved, okay, and ask how long it took. So, for example, the two original sins of the country were slavery and extermination of the indigenous population. How long has it taken for those to be overcome? Well, the indigenous population is virtually destroyed. I mean, they kind of survive, but under horrible conditions. Slavery is technically overcome, but other devices were quickly created which reinstated a version of slavery. I won't go through the history, but it happened in 1877, 10 years after the Civil War, effectively criminalizing black life, which sent black males into prisons where they became essentially a slave labor force. That changed that went on until the Second World War. Then there was a period in which of economic growth in which a substantial part of the black population could drift into the society. Finally, in the mid-60s, there was a successful civil rights legislation, but we're now back in a period roughly like the late 19th century, with the black population criminalized, especially black males, under the totally fraudulent drug war, and being driven back into the prisons. So there's been progress, but it's not over, and that's 400. The first slaves came in 1620. It's a long time. Let's take something which has a little more progress. Women's rights. How long did that take? You go back to the revolutionary period. The women were not persons. They were property. the founders of the country took over British common law, under which a woman was the property of her father transferred to her husband. One of the arguments against allowing women to vote in the early days of the Republic was that it would be unfair to unmarried men, because a married man would have 2 votes, because obviously the property votes the way its owner does. How long did that last? Well, it wasn't until 1975 that women were accepted legally as peers in federal juries. Women had no legal right to serve in a federal jury. You're supposed to be tried by a jury of your peers. But women didn't have that status until 1975. That's a pretty long time. It's changed, substantial change. The country's not like what it was 50 years ago, but you could never have predicted how long it was going to take. How long it was going to take depended on how much effort and energy and dedication and commitment would be put into changing it. And it's the same today.
I come from Afghanistan and will go back too, as it's part of my struggle that traveling and attending in conferences that supporters, this freedom-loving people of these countries invite me, and to bring the message of my people, to talk about realities of this so-called war on terror and these fundamentalists, brutalities of these fundamentalists, and asking for international solidarity, because otherwise we will leave all these tribune to these so-called democrat women or men who are traveling a lot and deceiving good people around the world. And from this fame I want to use for the good cause for my people and supporter that they invite in different countries. That's the reason I'm coming. And of course there is a risk, and I accepted this risk, and I'm not better than my people. And we do struggle together for bringing peace, democracy, women's rights, these values in our country, and to do struggle against the occupation. And second part of your question, that an election, if I run, this previous elections, people called me to run. I did boycott. Same for presidential election. Even people don't see the number of my age. While because of my age, even I can't attend in this election, presidential election, because must be 40 years old. Anyway, but we experience this fraudulent, ridiculous election in our country, especially for someone like me. If run for the election, it is clear not possible, especially this time, to win. As they saw that what I did in the parliament, I exposed their masks through Tribune of Parliament. I did not sit silent. And they know that, again, if I go to parliament, I will be the same person. As again, I believe even that parliament will be more mafia parliament than the previous one, as we experience. Anyway, that's what I did about election, to be a political awareness, a chance for political awareness to the people, that why I did boycott. Like millions of other Afghans, they boycott this election now, and they do not run. And the person will be winner who will sign the selling of Afghanistan. I mean that to their godfather, to be puppet of the US. That will be the winner of this election. Like our people use this proverb that the donkey will be same, but only saddle will change. That will be the result. Yeah.
Okay, we'd like to thank Malalai Joya and Noam Chomsky for their talk this evening. If you would line up over here to pick up a copy of Malalai's book, she'll be happy to sign it for you.